next, and it's entitled The Business Case for Racial Healing. As you know, George Floyd's murder by a US police officer back in 2020 was a turning point for the United States, indeed for many countries around the world, and it put a spotlight, an urgent spotlight on the need for global racial healing. Well, today is the 8th US National Day of Racial Healing, and to mark the occasion and tell us more about their partnership, the Southern Communities Initiative, we've got two very special guests. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce you now to the Kellogg Foundation President and CEO, June Montgomery Tabron, and Robert F. Smith, founder and chairman and CEO of Vista Equity Partners. A big round of applause, please, for our two very special guests. Thank you. Come on up. Come on up. June, come and take a seat. Robert, come and take a seat. Thank you so much. It's great. It's great, firstly, to meet you, June. And Robert, I had the pleasure of talking to you about 3 years ago now.
Yes,
time flies, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And June, I believe this is your first ever Davos?
It is.
How's it going so far?
It's going wonderfully.
You're enjoying yourself, right? Okay, great. Well, as I mentioned in the introduction, today is the 8th annual Day of Racial Healing, created by your foundation, and it's been marked by many significant occasions in the United States, and of course your presence here in Davos. So June, to you first, just tell us a little bit more about the day and about your foundation and why you created it.
Sure, and good afternoon, everyone. And I'm honored to be here on the National Day of Racial Healing. And this is a day that was developed by the Kellogg Foundation and our grantees because we wanted to activate the vision of Martin Luther King and what he wanted for our nation. And so the National Day of Racial Healing is about coming together in communities, connecting people, trust. And I find it amazing that my first time in Davos is while the theme is rebuilding trust. And what I'm bringing is an approach to trust building among people, among communities, and it creates the pathway for people to transform systems so that they work better and provide opportunities for all.
And Robert, before I come to you, June, racial healing, tell us why that is so important, pathway to racial equality, because you make a point of really emphasizing that.
Absolutely. We don't believe that you can get to racial equity without the process of racial healing, because the healing is what allows people to reconnect, to build relationships, to learn others' stories and histories, and through that trust building, then we can speak together about what works in our communities, what isn't working, and then how do we transform those systems together. And I think many times we try to go straight to the work of transformation without doing the healing, and it doesn't build the kind of trust that's necessary to sustain the work that we do. And so we believe that racial equity only happens through racial healing.
Would you agree, Robert? I know you've always been very open about kind of your life and your family history. When it comes to racial healing, what are your thoughts?
I think June has it exactly right. There has to be an element of trust that has to be built within communities in order for those communities to function. We've seen that play out in some communities in terms of law enforcement and how their engagement with the community at large becomes better if they engage beyond just activities associated with something occurring in the community. Things related to sports, things related to how they do philanthropic work in those communities builds relationships. And in America, we have started off a period, I'll call it, once we had a period of desegregation, there is now a period of resegregation of communities. So people are no longer living near each other. They've moved out a lot of the city centers. They've moved into various communities. And so there is a lack of understanding of the other in many respects. When I was growing up, we had the great opportunity to play sports together, to be in band together. People from different parts of the city that I grew up in would get together and you'd experience very American cultural things. I always use one of these examples. I grew up across the street from the city park, and the Denver Symphony Orchestra would have summer concerts. And it always fascinated me as I was a young boy and my parents who loved music, how during those summer concerts, you'd see, our community, which was African American, grab the lawn chairs and the buckets of popcorn or whatever it was, and we'd walk across the golf course to the park and, get set up, and you'd see people from other neighborhoods that weren't African American and would come to that park, and we'd listen to the symphony on, Saturday afternoons. And then you saw how communities started to understand each other and play together. And we, of course, that extended once we went to elementary school and we played in band together. And that was an important part of bringing music, for instance, back into the classrooms. Because then you got to actually, when people play music together, you actually, develop a deeper understanding of self and of purpose and higher purpose. And that builds trust. And when you build those sort of relationships and that sort of fabric, it enables you as an adult to now move forward and invite people who are different than you into the workforce, okay, into environments. And that's a big part, the migration out of the cities that has happened in America has created more of the view of the other. And I think, part of what we have to do is literally put infrastructure in place so that we get to know each other better as citizens, as human beings. And that is going to ultimately propel what I think about is the trust component that leads to racial equity.
Yeah.
Before we talk about kind of corporates, I know it all begins with a conversation. It's really simple, isn't it? And a conversation about our names. I know this is something that you and your racial healers do.
Yes.
Can you tell us about it?
Absolutely. First of all, I do believe that people want to do this work and some just don't know how.
Yeah.
And so what we've developed at the Kellogg Foundation is a methodology around how do you have these conversations. And you start by affirming one another. You start by allowing someone to tell their story and listening to that story. And through that listening and that conversation, you learn where the commonality is. And it goes to the affirmation of our human existence. And so one of the things that we do is called a conocimiento, which is how do you get to know one another for who they are, their history and their story. So as Robert just did, I think you demonstrated that well. You begin to talk about who are you? Why are you here? What are you doing? I speak about, I am a child of the northern migration. My parents are from Mississippi, and they moved north because my father wanted opportunities. Even after being in the Army, could not find employment in Mississippi. So he moved to Detroit, Michigan, and pursuing an opportunity in the auto industry, which he was able to obtain. And so I'm number 9 of 10 children. And but he very much believed, he and my mother, in education. And so the 10 of us were educated, and 8 of us have college education as well. And so I am a part of that generation where I grew up in a space where there weren't opportunities, and then there was. And I had the fortunate opportunity to be a part of some of the access that was provided in the 60s and 70s. And now here I am watching those opportunities shut down once again. And that is why this work is so important to me, because I know there are children out there just as I am who, but for the types of access, are not thriving. And we want to make sure that we can access their talents and their skills. And what we'll talk about later is how the Kellogg Foundation is really encouraging all sectors, but corporate America, to begin to think about how do we access all of the human talent that we have in the nation and the world, and allow them to contribute to the economic mobility of the nation and the world.
And Robert, you were nodding there while Ladine was telling us her fantastic story. We didn't hear about your name. Maybe we'll do that in a minute, Ladine.
Yes.
I love listening to the fact you telling me about your name's origins. How about you and kind of your background and your name?
So yeah, again, I'm 4th generation from Colorado. I'm the 4th generation in my family to go to college, which is astounding in America for anyone. Part of my family, my tribe, came through Oklahoma. and you've heard of the massacre that occurred in Oklahoma. They came from there, moved to Pueblo, Colorado, which is how we ended up settling. I have family members who are teachers, who really focused on the education in our community. They were business owners. They owned everything from pool halls to, five and dimes. So I come from a family that understood the importance of commerce, understood the importance of self-reliance, understood the importance of building economic infrastructure in the communities in which you live. And to Lejeune's point, as we have seen a pattern now of eliminating opportunities, like I talked about when I went to elementary school and junior high school, you showed up the first day. If you wanted to be in band, you went to the band class, they assigned you an instrument, and you learned how to play with people who look like this audience, okay? And then you played 4 years with each other and learned how to harmonize and learned how to settle disputes in music. And it would, and carry over in things like sports, and then of course in your calculus class. So that created communication through shared experiences. And I have friends from then, even today, that I communicate with frequently because we built a bond and relationship. All that's part of the fabric of community. And we've lost some of that fabric. And when economic opportunities are then presented, you go to people that you know, who you have relationships with. So part of what we do in our work together is opening the aperture, creating the infrastructure, and creating elements and opportunities for that trust to build, for those successes to build. In fact, you and I were on the stage some 3 years ago with Chuck Robbins, CEO, Cisco, and from our relationship in the back room, cutting a deal, we have now enabled the preservation of the Title IV funding for now 61 HBCUs. $1.5 billion preserved for the students, 80% of them access this, because we built a relationship, we built trust. His team, my team, went and effected that work since the last time we were here.
That's
so
amazing.
It's important to have gathering spaces. It's important to have missions that you can work on together. It's important to create an opportunity for that trust to build, and then for people to deliver on that. And that will actually stabilize our communities, enhance the economic opportunity for the communities, again, that we care about, and frankly, boost, in our case, the US economy quite dramatically by enabling people in the United States workforce to now become productive. But you've got to give them access to the tools of this next generation, which is really digital tools. That's part of what we spend time on here.
Well, let's talk about that then, and the kind of role of the corporate world. Going back to 2020 and the murder of George Floyd, there was an outpouring of support, particularly from the corporate world. I think there was a pledge of, I wrote it down, $340 billion was put on the table by corporate America to address racial inequality. Of course, we're 3 years on now from that seismic movement. What's happened to the progress? What's happened to the momentum behind that? What's your feeling?
So there was a moment, right, in 2020 where the acknowledgement of racism in the United States, and particularly structural racism, was palpable. And what we had was this moment where everyone leaned in and wanted to tackle this issue. What they did not have total understanding of is how to take their motivation and plug it in to work that was already happening on the ground in this space. And I think what we are doing in Southern Communities Initiatives is building and allowing those companies that were very intentional in their passion and aspiration to be a part of the problem, a part of the solution and not the problem, and committed these great resources. What they didn't have is the infrastructure or the work on the ground that they could invest in. So what Southern Community Initiatives is doing is really thinking about, okay, this work is already happening, and if we focus and collaborate, what we can then do is strengthen everyone's intentions, because the work can happen in a consolidated way with collective action that can make a difference on the ground. So Southern communities, 6 Southern states, and if you look at those 6 Southern states, you're looking at over 50% of the African American population in the nation. So if we're really interested in dismantling the systems that would create a murder, like a George Floyd murder, where a police officer will so brutally do this in plain sight. Companies don't know how to do that part of the work, but they know is necessary. So you have a collaboration with philanthropy, who's been doing this work on the ground in communities for this foundation for over 90 years. Yeah. And that partnership between that access to community, the trust building that's been happening over decades, to plug that in with corporate America and their intentionality and the structures that we can create together will then allow the actual transformation that we need in our communities so that these racialized events don't continue to tear down our nation. And so that's what our work is about, is plugging in and providing on-ramps for companies to do this work with us and actually do work that matters, that actually creates results for people in those communities, builds wealth, allows the type of access that's sustainable.
Yeah. And you both are in partnership on this. Robert, I know that you're one of the founding partners of the Southern Communities Initiative, or SCI, as we'll probably hear it from now on. I mean, why is it, in your opinion, such a great initiative in terms of the work that you're doing on the ground? And I think you've highlighted 2 key areas where you think kind of you're catalyzing real change. Are you able to tell us about these?
So the original idea came from, we started the Business Roundtable really evaluating the inequities in America across a bunch of different lines. And we came up with a number of, call it, subcommittees, and people did a bunch of work and came out of that saying there are some disparities that are systemic. There are some inequities that are systemic. And there are some well-intentioned corporations, okay, that can partner with foundations who are saying, businesses, we want to solve problems. Yeah. That's what we like to do. We like to, here's a problem, let's put energy, resources, organizational capacity, money, whatever it is against it, and solve the problem. And then you saw well, I don't know how we actually get to these communities. So we partnered first with Rich Lesser, who was then chairman of BCG, and Dan Schumann, who was chairman of PayPal at the time, said, all right, guys, let's see if we can pull this together and organize, again, these communities, 6 communities, 100-mile radius of those 6 communities get 50% of the African-American population. So that's point 1. Where are the inequities? One of the equities, of course, was in access to financial services, banking. I grew up in a neighborhood there was no branch bank in my neighborhood. 70% of African-American communities don't have a branch bank, even today. Wow. Okay, even in the neighborhood I grew up in, there is a branch bank there. I have never seen it open.
Wow.
Okay, the name's there. I've never seen it open. These communities don't have broadband access. So when you think about, we've been talking here, 4th Industrial Revolution, right? Kind of pre-COVID, all those sort of things. Well, if you don't have access to broadband, okay, you won't have access to the tools for economic enablement. Okay, so we launched in here the Edison Alliance, 1 billion people connected. Now we're building out the infrastructure of that, and we'll talk about our success. We're about 80% of the way there, but those are some of the initiatives. So we took this and said, all right, let's look at these 6 communities. What are the things that we can do? Well, one of the things we can do is digitize the banks, in that case, the CDFIs and MDIs, so Community Development Financial Institutions, which are the institutions that service our communities. That's where you go get a $10,000 business loan to expand your restaurant, to expand your beauty shop, to expand your insurance agency, because the banks don't know you and they don't bank there. Okay, they don't have an understanding of your business. So that's one, digitizing the infrastructure for the financial institutions that serve our community. Let's talk about a result. There's one, Hope Credit Union, Bill Bynum. Bill, he was doing 60, that Hope Credit Union in the Delta, arguably one of the most disadvantaged economic places, beautiful people and soul in the United States. Okay, Mississippi, 60 loans a year was what he was doing. digitize the bank, bring in that infrastructure, 1,900 loans now a year with a loss ratio less than the FDIC average. Okay, that's the power of digital infrastructure with a community, institution that knows that community. Their average loan is $11,000. And from that, his estimation, 30,000 additional jobs are created in that environment, and it creates stability.
Yeah.
Why do you have crime in neighborhoods? Because they often don't have economic stability.
Yep.
Okay? Create jobs, create, internships, summer jobs for the students in that community. Give them an opportunity to see how to progress in life that stabilizes that community in a way where all of a sudden, property values go up. Okay, wealth, it goes up. You can now borrow against houses as your wealth goes up and your property value goes up. People can send their kids to college. Okay, all those are the things, and those are those core infrastructure parts that we have to build and rebuild systemically. And so Southern Communities Initiative is designed to identify just that, bring specific resources to solving those problems. Not talking about it, but solving those problems.
And just to connect the dots, Hope Credit Union is a credit union that was seeded by the Kellogg Foundation.
Right.
So we were working in the South, and there wasn't even a CDFI in the region where we were working. And we needed to capitalize Hope Credit Union in order so that they could become a CDFI.
By the way, state of Mississippi, 28% African American.
Exactly.
Okay, and you don't have banking for 28% of your citizenship. Okay, those are the systemic things that we know we can now change by bringing technology, infrastructure, will, and intention, and partnership. So that's the importance of building corporate, philanthropic, and call it public partnerships to solve the problems in the communities that we care about.
And I know, Lejeune, your foundation does a lot on access to capital. So are you seeing traction? Are you seeing progress in those kind of community projects that you have?
Absolutely. And in fact, Hope is a good example. And, they were, closer to Jackson. We needed one in Drew, Mississippi, which didn't have a grocery store.
Right.
And the only way they could get a grocery store was to begin an entrepreneurship program. So what the Kellogg Foundation is doing is really beginning to be that risk capital to allow resources for these wicked problems that need investment. And we can be that first dollar and then invite others after the model has been created to prove that out. I think another great example of the Kellogg Foundation's work is our Entrepreneurs of Color Fund. Again, it was a fund that was created because people of color in Detroit could not access capital. And these companies were great small businesses. An example of one is an electrician, a woman electrician that had her own company, but she couldn't bid on Little Caesars development that was going up because that structure requires at least a 120-day float of capital for any supplier to participate in that development. And of course, she didn't have that kind of cash flow, but she was one of the best in the business. Our Entrepreneurs of Color Fund provided the capital for her, and her loan was just to cover the float. She had the people, the expertise. She couldn't cover that structural barrier that leaves small business and people of color behind. We gave her that. She got the contract. She was a wonderful, not only did she do great at Little Caesars, she then was a contractor when Wayne State University expanded. She was there. And so it was just a little bit of capital that was needed to take her to the next level. But that access just isn't there. And those are the kind of problems that philanthropy in community hears and then comes up with a model to solve.
Yeah, and you shouldn't have to deal with that in the first place,
Exactly.
should you? But it's great the work you're doing. And Robert, I know you also do a lot of focus on for students, historically Black colleges and universities. What is the focus for the SCI in that area as well?
There's a couple elements with SCI and SFI on students. We talked a little bit about what we had to do to protect ultimately the Title IV funding with building out the cybersecurity infrastructure. So that was an important element to protect, again, $1.4 billion annually, which 80% of HBCU students access. So that's the first thing. So we're, again, end of job on that, which is fantastic. The next piece is broadband. We determined that 82% of these HBCUs actually are in broadband deserts. Now,
Which is an insane
it is,
statistic.
but it's interesting. So when you talk to the carrier executives, no, it isn't, and they show you the map. But what you actually find out, they ran the cable, but they never put up the last mile extensions, right? So that's where the issues are. And you saw students during the pandemic who are now sitting outside of fast food restaurants utilizing their broadband to do their homework because there isn't any in the classrooms, et cetera. So what we've now done is the following. The U.S. government did a good job passing two bills, infrastructure bills, in excess of about $100 billion for creating broadband access for areas where they don't have it or rural infrastructure where it doesn't exist. Great, but the way that it works in the U.S. is it goes from the federal allocation to the states. And just like my grandfather coming back from World War II wanted access to the GI Bill, well, it was delivered in a state where they decided, you know what, African Americans aren't going to gain access. Only 5% of African American access, returning veterans got access to the GI Bill because it gets state mandated. Well, each of the states is required to go out and do surveys. Well, what we found out, they do surveys, but they actually didn't hit the African American communities, the HBCUs, about what the disparities were in broadband access. So we mobilized our team. We've now completed it. These surveys for every one of the states where the HBCUs exist. I sat with our Secretary of Commerce and went through, here's the data. We've had McKinsey validate all that. And now that's going to be included in the broadband plans, because now the states have to say, okay, here's my broadband plan to get the federal dollars. That now, she's assured us that it's going to be included in the element of how they're going to determine who gets this capital. So with any luck and intention, okay, because we've done that piece of the work, we should be able to digitize the rest of the HBCUs utilizing this, the BEAD funding, which is the infrastructure bill funding, which will enable these students to become more enabled to participate in this fourth industrial revolution at the college university level. So that's the work that we've been doing in that work.
How long did it take you, out of interest, to do that work?
Oh, we're working. We're almost into job, so two and a half years.
Which is nothing really, given the scale of the problem. It shows if you put your mind to something, what you get done.
Yes. But you've got to go do the lift. You've got to form the teams. You've got to create the partnerships. You've got to create the templates. Then we had, I think it's over 61 town halls, over 6,000 people to these town halls, because that's how you collect the data and get the stories and the insights, the information, prepare that in a way that it is now in a usable format that can be used for the grants and the bid proposals. So time didn't take that long. It is a massive amount of work and a massive amount of effort to do that. But if you don't do that, then you have a whole community of Americans who are left out on what is this fourth industrial revolution. It is the value creation. It is the wealth creation that's going to occur for the next 2 to 3 generations. But if you don't have access to the basic tools, if you don't have access to the basic, you think about it, insights around what you will never catch up. And so we've got to manage those disparities now in our time with the resources we have available to us.
Especially when you walk down the promenade and AI is everywhere. So technology is changing at breakneck speed. And what are your fears around that, or concern? I mean, it's a great leveler potentially, but it also could widen the digital divide.
And that is definitely a concern. And before we pivot there, I just want to go back to the premise of SCI, because we've just described, I think, yes, there's a lot of hard work in the background, but that work is getting done.
Right.
And so the proposition for those corporations that made that $340 billion worth of commitments is to now say, we've done that work.
Right.
Let's come back to these commitments. And those that have not deployed that capital, we now have shovel-ready, on-ramp that you can, a portal by which you can now deploy those resources, and they will return the type of equality that you espoused as you were making those commitments. So that is what this partnership is about, is the collective action that we can do and the impact that we can actually make on the ground, because there's been this very consistent, intentional system building work that's happening to make sure that those dollars will return.
So shovel ready, it's such a
Exactly.
it's such a great phrase. I mean, is that your call to action, Robert? I mean, you know everyone. I mean, you have a black book to die for. So are you walking around Davos kind of, Chuck Robbins was 3 years ago. Who's on your list this year?
Yes.
It is critically important for us to ensure people understand, and we've got ways that we've shared with folks, that we have built out the infrastructure, we have the accountability, we've got the teams in place, and now it's just delivering the capital and the resources. Some of them are enabling, African-American women through like Green America in certain of these communities to ensure that they can scale their businesses. Others are, the digitization of CDFIs and MDIs. Others, we've got banks now saying, okay, look, this sounds good. Let's do loan guarantees for these CDFIs, right? So there's elements of that we have now built out, and now, it is shovel ready, and now we've got to, you didn't fulfill your pledge, here's ways to do it. It is done through corporations that you trust, that you've got some relationships with, and oh, by the way, we've got local partners who are able to implement this effectively with what I'll call without the waste. Great. Now what we have to talk about is next set of opportunities, right? Part of it, you mentioned it,
Right.
Gen AI, right? Yeah, there's a whole lot of things around Gen AI. One of the things like, well, again, we have to provide access. Gen AI is going to be a massive enabler for digital infrastructure, okay? And these are, companies and corporations. And so one of the things we've done, we've noticed that in the HBCUs, they don't have any courses on it. So we use one of our company's stats to do a Gen AI curriculum. We rolled it out in Morehouse because oversubscribed coursework, of course. But they have to become familiar with it and understand it and what's going to be the implications. We often have invited a number of our HBCUs in to participate with our hackathons with our corporations, our top scientists, AI scientists, where we have partnerships with Microsoft and with AWS and with Google and their chief scientists, and say, okay, what is the use case of Gen AI in this situation? And we have those students there as well, so that they can see. It's those, it's like the opportunity. My life changed through an internship where I got to go work in a place called Bell Laboratories, which, wow, they were doing things there no one in my neighborhood knew about.
Exactly.
You and I talked about part of what we have to do in Davos is bring what we find here back to the communities that we care about. Often what we find here are relationships.
Yeah.
It's structures, it's technology, it's enablement, it's partnerships, structures of those partnerships, and that's part of the role that we have to do for communities that don't have access day to day to this sort of environment. Part of our job is to be the missionaries to our communities in that respect. So that's what we have to do.
I read a survey actually that said, I think half of Americans believe that corporate America is not doing enough to kind of help in these areas. I mean, would you agree with that? And what's your call to action, LaJune? I mean, you're here, you're talking to business leaders. Well, what do you want from them?
Well, I think, one, we want the partnership. These are very complicated situations that we're in, and it takes all of us. And I think here's a good example. The Kellogg Foundation has been investing in early childhood education since the beginning of time, and we've always known of the gaps in that system. Underpaid providers, lack of access to early quality child care, because many people now cannot even afford child care at the rate that it is. And yet, the providers aren't getting those dollars. And so we've known all that. And then there was this pandemic. And all of a sudden, the providers quit because they were not paid well enough to sustain that. Systems shut down, which meant parents couldn't work, which meant productivity declined in the corporate sector. And then all of a sudden there was this aha, we can work together. This is important to all of us. understanding that pipeline and the intersections between the work that we're doing in building capacity in communities, but how that contributes to the workforce and that ecosystem became really apparent. And in many of our communities, we had consistent partnership with our corporate partners. We've built new facilities. They've showed up at the table to help us at the policy level, advocate for equal pay for the providers, to begin to think about how they can be a part and leverage the capacity that they have and the relationships that they have to build these systems that actually work, not only for the parents, but for our economy. Yeah. So that's the kind of partnership that we're continuing to ask for. And, you know, there's no place like Davos for us to emphasize how these partnerships work.
Yeah, great point. I will submit the following, though. I will submit that, again, Edelman always, you know, the surveys, corporations are still the most trusted institutions out there. Corporations are doing a lot.
Yes.
I would submit that it doesn't get covered. Okay, media has a role in this. Okay, the good work that gets done, I have the great fortune of talking to a lot of CEOs and I hear about the good work. I don't see it in broad-based media.
Yeah.
Everybody's picking up on negative,
Headlines.
whatever. Okay, right. So media has a role in educating the communities of the good work that is being done. Corporations also have a role to help citizenry understand what we provide. I'm amazed that the younger generation, in some respects, doesn't really understand the virtuous cycle of corporations. It's not perfect, but the virtuous cycle of providing good services that actually improve the lives and the condition, education, welfare, food, all those sorts of things. Corporations are often bringing forth the resources, the organizational capacity to change the condition of this planet. And you know all the statistics. You know, in terms of how we've been able to fight hunger and poverty and illness, all that. Corporations have a major role in that. I don't think we talk about that enough.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I don't think that there is enough support in that regard. Don't get me wrong. We have more to do, and if we make pledges, we need to fulfill those pledges. But the media also has to really shape what capitalism has done, and the importance of capitalism in providing freedom for the individual, the ability to liberate the human spirit, and the ability for the human spirit to now deliver back to the communities they care about other liberating opportunities. Capitalism is the only system that does that at scale, and with less discrimination than any other.
Yeah.
Our job is to eliminate what discrimination does exist, okay? But your job as media is also to articulate the role of capitalism in the society that we live in, the positive role, not just the negative role.
And I know that corporates are still trusted way above politicians and journalists.
Yes.
They're definitely doing something right compared to
And
ours.
I'll give you a positive example to your point. We've been doing work with corporate America. We call it our expanding equity.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Body of work. And this, again, we had actually started this work before the pandemic. And our approach was, okay, we're this $8.5 billion foundation. We're required to give out 5%. But what can we do with the other 95%? How do we leverage that toward our mission and the same outcomes that we want? And we decided to go to our money managers and have a conversation about how they were looking at equity within their own firms and within their own sector. And we had this great dialogue, and several of our money managers became champions for us and became the first cohort where they were going to look internally and build equitable systems in their own firms that would make sure that they were allowing opportunities for people of color, for women, et cetera. After the George Floyd murder, our expanding equity work actually expanded. And we were, all of a sudden, had over 100 Fortune 500 companies that were working with us in this space. And the reason why they chose this collaboration is because the Kellogg Foundation, working with the data engine of McKinsey really began to think through not only what have been practices that work around DEI, and also we gave particular insight to these companies of their own environment. So we conducted surveys where they were able to see, this is how people feel in my company on this issue. Do they feel as if they belong? Do they feel as if they have access to promotions and other ways of really belonging and being of value in this company? They've been working together. They've created now these pathways. We're actually going to release a report tomorrow, our Expanding Equity Report, which will be the result of this work of this cohort since 2020 with best practices of this is what works. For other companies that may be at a different part in the journey, this is how we've built an environment where people feel as if they belong and can grow and thrive. And that's work that you can do inside as well as then be champions externally to help others continue this pursuit of equity.
I think 600 leaders you're working with.
Absolutely.
It's a huge cohort,
Yes.
isn't it? I mean, what works for you at Vista Equity Partners? I know this is a huge area for you as well as a business leader.
So the business imperative is what I'm trying to help people really understand. In terms of alternative asset managers, the NAIC has done a 20-year longitudinal study, and they've done it twice. And it shows that diverse managers are overproducing above the Burgess Index between 200 and 1,600 basis points.
Wow.
Yeah, okay? But yet they manage control less than 2% of the assets. This includes women, right? That's available for asset managers. The business rationale is there. And now we have to ensure that we get into the eyes and hands of people who are making those decisions, not only the data, but also the managers who do this extremely well. It's a process, and building infrastructure for that process is important. Building infrastructure to ensure that we are building out capacity and diversity. I'm one of the only gender parity firms, I think, on the planet. Of course, one of the only of size. One of the only where I've got 100% of my boards have at least one person of color. 94% have at least one woman on them. We have, I think, 87 boards or portfolio companies today. All that leads to some of the lowest loss ratios in the history of this industry, right? So the business rationale is there, and we have to continue to educate and inform as to people who are making those decisions, the importance of diversity. McKinsey, BCG, all that, there's studies, Deloitte, from here to forever that really point to that. Lower risk, higher returns, better outcomes, more expanded market, all that data is there. Okay, I'd love to see, again, media talking about this, especially in the face of what we're calling a retrenchment or retreating in the narrative of DE&I, but not necessarily the action. When I talk to corporations and CEOs, they're like, no, well, guess what? I'm doing what I know is right, because I look at the data. Most of the CEOs I know are really data-oriented. It's like, I've got to go grow my business. I'm a fiduciary.
That's exactly
And I've got to make the decisions around diversity, workforce, talent, okay? War for talent, which is what we were talking about for the last 5 years, 8 years, is still on, okay? And so where do you get the talent? How do you develop that talent? You may not talk about it because certain politicians don't want you talking about it, but you have got to grow your business. You've got to create sales. You've got to create productivity. You've got to, improve your profits, creating that virtuous cycle. So the actions I see are there. I just don't see them propagated in ways that people gain the confidence to continue to talk about them. But I see people still doing the right things because they know if they don't, they're going to lose their competitive advantage in terms of revenue growth, profitability, and the ability for them to sustain their own corporations and businesses.
Exactly.
You agree?
Absolutely, I agree. And our cohort has reiterated that. Over 80% of them are saying we are not retrenching at all. We are doubling down, actually. And all of them, to your point, whether it's reframed or a new way to talk about it, they understand the business case and they are continuing to drive their business.
Right.
And before I open up to the floor, we'd love to get some questions going just a few minutes' time. talk about the business case, talk about the economic case,
Yes.
because I know that your foundation has put a number on it in
Yes.
terms of that if you close the US racial equity gap, you could realize an $8 trillion GDP gain by 2050. I mean, that's a hell of a number, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's, that was research that we commissioned to create this business case. And this work started really in 2013, and we've updated this material. But the bottom line is $8 trillion by 2050, we're leaving on the table because we are not activating all of our human capital in the economic system. And if we do so, those are the kind of numbers. Basically, it's a 0.5 percentage point of growth in GDP every year from now to 2050 if we were to be consistent and make sure that we are growing talent, developing talent, giving them access to new technologies, allowing this economy to be the best in the world and not leaving anyone behind. And so that research is continuing to build it. If you look at the data, which is on our website, then of course that looks at, what does consumer spending then look like for the future?
Yeah.
What does tax revenues look like? And, in that same time period, we would generate enough additional tax revenues from making sure that everyone is participating to pay for the gaps in education that we say we don't have the resources to educate our young people. We can create those resources if we begin to actually grow this economy in a way where everyone is participating.
By 2050, people of color will be the biggest cohort in the workforce and
Exactly.
consumers. So, it's an enormous market. And Robert, you will know more than anyone, because I know you travel the world talking to clients everywhere, kind of the rise or the march of economies in Asia. And, the United States, and same with the UK and other Western countries, you've got to have everybody on board contributing to the economy if we, have a chance in the future.
Yeah, there's no question about it. Again, that the digital enablement is an infrastructure necessity, okay? The digital education is a necessity. We have to enable these folks to participate, be productive. Now, of course, and you know this, if you become productive, you have the job and it's a well-paying job and it's digital, guess what? You're going back in your neighborhood, you're buying the houses, you're developing, the communities and the neighborhoods, which make more value, you can borrow more money.
Yeah.
It's just that, this leads to that $8 trillion.
Exactly.
But if you starve entire communities of access to what is going to be the greatest wealth generator over the next 20 and 30 years, then guess what? You're going to suffer as well, because if those communities destabilize, continue to destabilize, A, you're going to be less competitive globally, so your growth is going to be stymied, and B, you're going to have to devote more resources to trying to stabilize those communities as opposed to letting them stabilize themselves. And it is proven that when you have income and opportunity and access to capital, access to food, all those things, those communities naturally stabilize. And crime goes down, productivity goes up, optimism goes up, all those things that make for a pleasant place to live. And so it's just logical sense to make that happen.
Are you optimistic? Are you an optimist?
I have to be.
Yeah.
I'm an investor,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and it's somewhat flipping the narrative. I think so many times we talk about this work as if it's a zero-sum game, right?
And it's-
That, if you're growing communities and their wealth, that you're taking it from someone else.
Yeah.
But the difference is what our business case talks more about is that shared fate. We all grow. The pie actually grows when we think about activating all of our human capital in the economic engine of our country. And so it isn't a zero sum. We actually all benefit. And that's what, we're really interested in that narrative shift so that people understand that. Too many people have been led along this path of, the threats and how they may lose, but really everyone gains.
Yeah.
And back to your point on AI, I think this is another role for philanthropy to really get out ahead. Of course, we're very concerned about biases that get technologically enhanced if not attended to. We're also very much concerned about expanding inequality for those who have access and those who do not. And so what we want to do, and I'll give you an example, we had a great conversation with some of the actual researchers from Microsoft, the creators of Copilot. And we actually asked if we could sit with them as they were designing to think about whether biases may be unintentionally built into what Copilot might direct us or guide us toward. And that's a partnership that I believe is very critical for us to forge because, you know, and what we can bring is all of this community knowledge and from the ground, what people are saying, what people are thinking, how people are feeling, and making sure that that insight is a part of that solution as well. So that's how philanthropy can really be a part of this great advancement for our nation, but we have to make sure that we don't leave people behind and that they are a part of this growth.
Which is why it's so important you're here and you know,
Exactly.
like talking about community voices and representing community voices here at a World Summit. I've hogged you both for too long. I'd love to open the floor up for questions. I'm sorry, I should have come to you earlier. I've been very selfish, talking too much. But this gentleman in the front has got his hand up. So could we please get a microphone to him? And could you tell us your name, please, sir? That would be great.
Is it working?
I think it's working. Yeah, it is. Yep, there you go.
Okay, I think it's her. Good. Sid Wilson, President and CEO of the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility in Washington, D.C. I'm also the nation's first Afro-Latino CEO of any national Hispanic organization. You two are two beacons in the movement, and my question is, we know that the business case is there, and as you mentioned, Robert, there's 1,000 studies making that case. What do you think is the challenge in getting companies to change their corporate culture to allow for the business case to play out in a more inclusive way? Because our experience has been, you can show the business case, but some will say, I see the business case, but my 80-year-old culture just won't allow me to do it. So what do you think is your thoughts and solution on that?
So what we've learned from our cohort is, yes, there's some shifting that needs to happen. And one thing is the CEO or the leader of that organization first has to be committed and express this vision to its entire enterprise, right? And then not only express that vision, but begin to create what we call an authorizing environment so that everyone knows that this is appropriate and actually articulate it in ways that lead to outcomes for the company and be able to connect the dots between growth in the company and why this work is critically important. The other thing that I think we are learning, and it'll be a part of our report, but it is that you can't just hire someone called diversity and put them in an office in the building and expect that that person can really carry this work. It has to be carried by the entire enterprise, including middle management. And so there's a way that these companies have learned about how to really deploy and expand and embed the concept throughout the organization. And when that has been done, the culture has shifted and change has actually happened for these companies. And in our cohort, one of the companies has gone from up to 20% people of color and women from not very many at all. So understanding how to activate that within a company, I think is critical, and part of the report is helping people see some of the best practices to get there more quickly.
I think you're spot on in terms of what corporations can do, need to do, and what has to happen. I'm gonna give a little different tact. The stories of diversity success need to be told, and they need to be told more broadly. Again, media has a role here. I think about the companies that, when we found them, highly homogenized in their talent, and that's the way where you start a business, you start in a community, you hire from that community, it might be university, and you hire the same people, and you get to 100 million in revenues and maybe 150, but you've tapped out that community in terms of people to grow to 400 million. And then We'll come in and open the aperture. Here are places that we can recruit from that you otherwise didn't. And all of a sudden the company, you inflect the growth, you inflect the profitability. Oh yeah, we know about that. But the media never covers that stuff, okay? Those are the stories that give the CEOs and boards confidence to drive change in 80-year-old culture. But if you don't hear about it, you're gonna think, oh, I've got to deal with the resistance in my organization, as opposed to companies that did this inflected growth. They're more profitable. That's what these studies say. Great, these are aggregate studies. Let's see the 25 examples, show them, demonstrate them, put the people, put the faces, okay? And show them, base meters like, I want my company to do that. I want to get paid more. I need that company to grow. Let me change what we're doing, because what we're doing now is okay, but we don't need to be okay. We need to be great, and we need to be better. And so there's that element that has to happen. Sure, it's great when you get exceptional leadership who can then drive that change. It's better if it becomes a movement, okay, of a culture, and you think about it, a country, an industry that says, we have got to do this to survive in a more highly competitive environment. In a demographic that is changing, okay, in a globally connected world where resources can be driven into our competitors' hand, because young people are like, I'm going to places that I feel comfortable, I feel loved, I want to go to a place where I can bring my talents, and those talents become valuable.
Exactly.
Those are the things I think that now have to happen beyond what we do in the internal corporations.
Yeah, good point, very good point. Thank you very much, a great question. There's a lady behind as well who's got a hand up. If you could tell us your name as well, please, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for this conversation. My name is Devaney Smith. I'm also from Washington, D.C. on behalf of the Global Shapers from the World Economic Forum. And my question is specifically on Southern Communities Initiative. I really appreciate the communities that you're in, especially as a native North Carolinian. Now that I live in DC, I see a lot of the gaps of equity there as well. And I'm wondering if there's any thoughts or appetite for expanding to different communities within the US.
Well, I think the original vision was build the model in the southern states, and then that model would expand throughout the United States. So that's typically how we work, is, take that proof of concept and reach everyone. So that is, right now we're focusing on the southern communities again, as was described, but the data and the knowledge, what we're gonna learn, will be shared for everyone.
Yeah, to that point, our board, our original intention was, let's get this right and show it. And look, we had 30 communities that wanted us to go into those. We said, if we do 6 of them extremely well, then we can talk about how do you make it more extensible. And I'm of the view, get it right and then replicate it, as opposed to do it half. I don't want to say half-assed, but I did say and scale too quickly. So let's create repeatable, sustainable infrastructure processes. It's incredibly important to have the right local partners. And we spent probably 40% of the time that we finding the right local partners, because every nonprofit in the local, oh, we can do that, we can do that, because they're used to the, get capital, we'll, kind of do stuff, wave our hands and not really produce. And we're like, no. We want partners who are going to produce, who are going to be accountable, they're auditable, all that. So we spent a lot of time there, and we had to have some tough conversations. We like what you do, but you're not for us. And the ones that we are going with are the ones that we have vetted. We're comfortable with the leaders, the organizational, institutional capacity, so that even if something happens to the leader, that organization can carry on the mission. And that's how we approached it.
And are you getting noticed by political leaders on the ground? I mean, is there a lot of political traction there, would you say?
As far as being a part of this
with
partnership,
SCI, are you getting kind of backing, kind of on a government or political level from the work that you're doing on the ground? You don't have to answer it.
No, we actually, but we got backing. Certain of the mayors are all over it. And they get it like,
and they know most, don't they? They know the issues more than anyone.
Know the issues and know the impact of what we do and how it impacts their communities. Of course, they're looking for, next election and all that. But they're like, wait a minute, you can create this sort of jobs, you can create this sort of lending, you can bring this sort of cap, all in, right? And you got, like all things, you got to, measure it and all that. But it's important to bring institutions into those organizations to say, look, we're not standing for any politics, we're standing for
Right.
results. And that's what
Yeah.
we drive.
Okay. Time for one more question. There was someone else with their hand up, I'm sure there was. Was there someone else with their hand up? Anyone going to be brave?
I think it was my cousin.
Okay, well, look, in closing, because we are pretty much towards the end of our time now, I mean, what are you hoping to achieve? Let's at Davos. June, let's start with you. Of
Yeah.
course, it is your first Davos. We're so
Yes.
grateful that you're here. With all the great work that you're doing, what would you like to go home to Michigan, right?
Yeah.
With having achieved?
Well, and thank you. It is my first Davos, and I didn't know what to expect. But the message that we wanted to bring from a philanthropic perspective is we're all in to this space. We care about our world economy, and philanthropy is really playing a key role in a larger body of work. And we want, again, to make those intersections and to learn. So I'm learning a lot here. I'm going to take that back to our work because we don't want to work in isolation. We want to be a part of the ecosystem and continue to grow and learn in that space. The message to our great corporate partners is we want to partner. There are ways that when we work together, we can make even greater impact because we have maybe different approaches, but we want the same outcomes. And so, and the work here today on the National Day of Racial Healing, this work has to start with conversations, with trust building, just as the theme is for this conference. And we've been working very, very hard in building trust among people and communities, and that work needs to continue. It's not, some people say to us, you're doing fluffy work. Why are you building and funding, conversations? It is the most difficult part of all of this that we're talking about. And we knew that, and we wanted to lean into that. And when you actually engage, you realize it may be difficult, and it hasn't happened because it's difficult, and people want to skip it. But when it's done well, and when we think about the healing that we all need from the trauma of racism, this makes this work glide moving forward as we've built relationships and have great understanding of one another.
And what would you say, Davos
We don't do
veteran?
fluffy work. We get it done. And building and strengthening relationships, ensuring that we have the right partnerships, reinvesting in certain of those partnerships so that they can actually bring the resources to the communities that we care about and the businesses that we care about. Again, I focus on the business imperative as the first order of business. That business imperative means we have to actualize and activate all citizenry to be effective in driving forward economic opportunity. That's what lifts all boats. And part of it, I can just tell, people don't want to do the lift, fine, let's go put the infrastructure in place so they don't have to do the lift.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's how we think about it.
Okay. Great. We have to leave it there, but it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. For June Montgomery Tabron and
you.
Robert F. Smith, thank you so much. A big round of applause.
Pleasure. Thanks.
It's been really great. Thank you so much. You can stand up and head back down. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's right. I'm also going to hand over now